Today we're very pleased to have our noted local architectural historian, Maral Kalbian, as our speaker. She's been practicing in the Shenandoah Valley and Piedmont areas of Virginia for 26 years. Maral researches, evaluates, and documents historic structures. And she also meets the qualifications as both a historian and an architectural historian, as defined by the National Park Service, and maybe you can talk about what that distinction actually means. Her work includes the organization and completion of architectural history and cultural inventories, preparation of survey reports, writing of individual and historic district nominations for the National Register, writing of walking or driving tours, historic districts, ordinances, design guidelines, all of the stuff that goes along with documenting historic preservation for certification and tax credits. So she does the whole 9 yards. Maral earned her BA in art history from Smith College and a master's degree in architectural history and certificate in historic preservation from the University of Virginia. And she serves as a contractual architectural historian to Clarke, Frederick, and Fauquier counties and the city of Charlottesville. She has publications, which she's welcome to sell, Clarke County and Frederick County, Virginia, History Through Architecture. So she's lectured extensively, and we're very happy to have her here to enlighten us about how to research your house. And since we also have a historic district that's full of commercial properties, maybe you can add that into it a little bit too. So please welcome Maral Kalbian.
Thank you, Ed. And yes, I will include how to also research other historic buildings in general.
Right.
Thank you all for coming. It's nice to see familiar faces and some new faces, and I hope that my presentation will enlighten you and help you all to be able to try to research your historic property by yourself, and then you can call me if you need any help. Giving away all the secrets here. Okay. Where to start? That's a good question. The thing you should always ask yourself is, what's the purpose of the research that I'm conducting? Is it to do a National Register nomination? Is it because I'm curious, just it's a house where I live? Is this a tax credit project? I need to justify certain changes I want to make to the building. Am I, writing my family history and I want to know more about the house that we've lived in? Really, you just need to figure out what the purpose of the research is so that then you can hone in on that. And that, of course, dictates the amount of detail that's going to be needed. One of the first things you should also do is consider the historic context of any building that you research. And what I mean by that is really, where does it fit into the bigger picture? Because you can't look at a historic building, or any building for that matter, just in a vacuum. And I'll get into that a little more. You want to look at primary sources. By primary sources, I mean deeds, photographs, the land tax records. I'm going to get into all this, as well as secondary sources can provide a good starting off place. Things like, and I don't mean to be pushing my books, but those are really good starting off places, and that was really their whole purpose, was to give people a sense of where they could start and go from there. Also, talking to previous owners can be very helpful. Sometimes we tend to forget that really very obvious source of information. And then also looking at the physical condition of the building. And I really feel like this talk breaks things down into two parts. There's the research part, and that's what I'm going to do. The main detail, concentrate a lot on. But the second part is really looking at the building and seeing what the building can tell you. And that comes from really a knowledge of architectural history and when different materials were used, why they were used, what's original, what's replacement. And that I unfortunately can't teach you within this short period of time. But there are resources where you can find information about that. Okay, historic context. That I mean, looking at books, seeing if your house or your property is mentioned in it. National Register nomination forms. These, particularly if you're in a historic district, these are available online through the Department of Historic Resources website, and they're PDFs, so you can search for your address and see what they say about your property, because they'll give a date, and sometimes there will be even more information about that. Section 106 reports. These are reports that are done in conjunction with when federal funds or a federal license is needed for a project. What it does is it triggers Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act, and the agency who's conducting the work has to do basically a survey of the buildings that are there. So very often you find architectural surveys, like I did one of the whole Route 340 North Corridor through West Virginia, where it goes from 4-lane in Clarke County to 2-lane, and I documented all those buildings. But that wouldn't be an easy resource to find, because they're not available online. So you really need to go to the Department of Historic Resources, or if you're in West Virginia, the West Virginia Department of Historic Resources. And that's their website. Sorry, that came up as a fade. Then, of course, the local archives have a lot of information, like all the survey information that I did in Frederick County, which includes Stevens City and Middletown, and all those things are at the local archives at Handley. And then I know the Winchester survey forms are also at Handley, and I believe they're at PHW too, the copies of those. And then, of course, once you get into more detail, there are the state and federal archives, and a lot of this information is available online, and I'll get into some of that. So there's a lot of things out there to help you. It's just a matter of knowing where to look. Okay, getting back to what I was talking about, the physical context and actually looking at the building itself. And I've spent a long time now looking at buildings, and these are of the local tradition. So it's pretty easy for me to look at a building and identify when it was constructed, what's original, what was changed. And that just has come through experience, through, guessing about something and then confirming it through other data, and just sort of building a database in my brain of, how things work. But in describing how you should do that for yourself, the first thing you should look at is, really comparing it to other buildings in the area and seeing how does it differ. Is this the fanciest house on the block? Because that in and of itself will tell you something. Or does it look like all the other ones? And then looking at the construction material, you're not going to find a cinder block house that was constructed in the 19th century. You might find a log house constructed in the early 20th century, however. But there are different kinds of materials, and of course decorative treatments, additions on porches and brackets in the eaves, but a lot of times those are added later. And so you think what's a Victorian 1880s house is in fact maybe constructed in 1820. But things looking at the height and the massing, the details, the way the roof is, the pitch of the roof. Ranch houses have a much shallower pitch than 18th century houses, for example. But I doubt you confuse a ranch house with although. And then, again, the siting on the street or the lot. Is it set back? Does it share the same setback as the other buildings, or is it set back further? Usually that indicates, sometimes that indicates that it was the earliest house there, and then other times, depending on how it was constructed, it could have been a later addition. And then again, the alterations that have occurred. So basically, I think that's my point, is try to look, lift your head up and turn your head and look at all the other buildings around it, because sometimes that'll give you the biggest clue. Let's just, okay. So without getting deeply into those architectural differences. And what I'm going to focus on are the public records and how you really, what's the methodology of doing this. So I spend a lot of time in places like this. This is the archives, the clerk of the court, I call it my own personal archives, but it's there in Clarke County. And right across the street we have the clerk of the court for Frederick County and Winchester. They're right next to each other, which is handy because of annexation. You'll be dealing with Winchester, then Frederick County, and then it'll become Winchester. I always start any project with timelines and like deeds and chain of title, because that's going to give you the property owner, the description of the property, meaning the number of acres, the dates of ownership, names of the neighbors, and when the current owner bought it. So that means if you have a property, you start with yourself, if it's your own property, and you just work back. Now we have a lot of, with the GIS stuff that's online, you can actually go online, pick a property, and it'll give you the last deed book reference. So you start from there, you go to that deed book, and then it works its way back. And any of you who've ever read a deed, it tells you, being the same property that was conveyed to, John Lewis by Maral Kalbian in 1949 in deed book 10, page 485. So you can then go back. So you're basically skipping back in the deeds. And so that will give you the name of who owned it and when, and you write that information down because you're going to use that information later. Now, a lot of times when you get really far back, they won't tell you being the same property that Maral got from John Lewis. So you have to look at the index. There are these books. They're the index to deeds. And they're divided into grantors and grantees. So if you know who got it, then you look up their name, and then and they're in alphabetical order. You see here, like this is the grantor, so this is McCormick. And then they're all alphabetical, so the M's, are here. And then these are the people they were granted to, and then it'll tell you if these are all deed books, but they're different instruments, a trust, just a plain, simple deed. And then it tells you the book and the page number, and you go look at that. And if you all have any questions while I'm going along, please ask away. And these books look like this, and they're the exact same books across the street. And you'll see they usually break it down, like I think in Clarke County it went like 1836 when Clarke County was formed to 1970, 1970, and then they had new books. But you see they're alphabetical order. And you can look. And then there are also indexes to wills. That's something else that you'll run across, because a lot of times a property was inherited, so there is no deed. And that's why it's so important to know the names of the owners. And then it'll tell you, so you can also look them up in the deed index, and it'll tell you in will book A, and then a lot of times there's an inventory. Those are absolutely fabulous resources. So you're really playing history detective. That show is right on, That's what you're doing, and sometimes, you hit a gold mine, and other times it's nothing. For example, this is of Robert Page. This is when they sold everything in his estate, and these are, this was in the will book, for example, and I came across this, and it tells you amazing information. Who bought what, there's the purchaser, and then what they bought and how much they paid. And this is, in the 19th century, and it lists slaves by name and who bought them. There's just a wealth of information in these kinds of things. This was another one that Robert Page in Clarke County, he had a huge library also. Here, I guess this is a close-up of, the slave that was sold and to whom he sold it. But this is his library of books. You can see books. And I loved it. Here there was the history of the Shenandoah Valley by Kercheval that someone bought. I don't know, I just thought that was really, because I used Kercheval's History of the Valley a lot too. And sometimes these public records will lead you into other things, like chancery records. I was doing some research on actually a bridge that VDOT wanted to double lane. It's a single lane bridge in Clarke County, and I ended up finding this chancery record, and in fact it found that someone had done this wonderful little drawing, and it confirmed actually a lot of things for us, as where the original road was, when the bridge had been put in place, and was really helpful. Chancery cases, these are another great resource, because these are basically cases that a judge has to sort of make the decision as to what it is. They usually deal with land suits, they deal with inheritance, they deal with divorce, and they have been, a lot of them have been digitized on the Virginia State Library website. And I think with Frederick County, what they've done, they're on microfilm up until 1840, and then from 1840 on, they've all been scanned. So you can look up someone, like here, I think I looked up Wood, William Wood, and I got like 126 pages from this case that was in the 1880s. And there are things like this, like, newspaper advertisements. And the thing that's so great about chancery cases is there's a lot of witnesses that give testimony. So they'll tell you all these like little details about a place that you might otherwise never find. Okay, so when you have your deed, then you have your chain of title. You know who owned it, when, what size it was, that kind of stuff. You take that information, you can go look at the land tax records. So in Virginia, from 1782 to 1819, you'd have the name, taxpayer, number of acres, and then a value for the lot. So if you have a house that was built before 1819, it's not going to break out the value for the building, but after 1820, it breaks it out. So there's a value added for the buildings. Now, so if you're looking at something in 1830 and there's no value for a building, your house wasn't there then. And you can actually trace it back and see when all of a sudden it appeared. Land tax books, these are the ones in Clarke County. The rest are on microfilm. Hanley Library has them all on microfilm. They have them in the basement across the street for Winchester and Frederick County, as well as the personal property records, which I'm not even getting into those. This is what a sort of typical land tax book, they're really long ledger books. This is for Edward Clayton, who was colored, and so it tells me that information. It's more confirmation, more information I want. He owned the property, was 4 acres, but he owned it fee simple. It tells me where it was. It's adjoining Chapel Green, so it confirms I know where Chapel Green is because I've been looking again at the context of the whole thing. And it also tells you how far it is from the courthouse. So it's south 5 miles. Again, confirming you're dealing with the same property, because if you don't pay attention to detail, you will go off on very often on another tangent, be researching the wrong property. And I say that because I have done it on numerous occasions, and it just, it happens. It's very confusing. So attention to detail. If you're not a detail-oriented person, become one, because you'll save yourself a lot of time. So then it'll tell you like the total values of the land per acre, and then you keep on, so there's that, and then it'll tell you the total value of land, the value of the buildings, and then it'll tell you the sum indicated on account of buildings. This is what you really want to care about. It's that, make sure that is filled out. You see in some cases it's not, meaning it was just open land. And in this case, lucky I showed this, wasn't luck, but I showed this to show you that the year that it was done, if you had a good assessor, he would have put why there was all of a sudden value added. Like here, $100 added for buildings. So that's the kind of information you're looking for.
That's 1880. If you go back further, would the bump up in taxes imply that there was a building added? And did they appraise every so many years?
They appraised every year.
And I'm talking before 1811.
You mean before 1819?
my house is mentioned as 1811, it already
Okay,
existed.
so it is not going, you can look for, this would be helpful for you for additions that were made to the house. But because your house was built before 1819, what's gonna happen is, if you look at the 1821, it's gonna show all of a sudden the buildings were broken out. If you look at the 1819, they were all meshed together. See what I'm saying? It was land and buildings all before 1820, and then
But I'm
after
thinking
1820.
They had land value, and they got taxed on that.
Yeah.
And then the year they built the house, they raised the appraisal.
Yes, I see what you're saying. You can look for that. Sometimes, you know, it does increase, but not as dramatically as you would think. So that you have to sort of make some observations. It could be outbuildings. It could be, you have to sort of keep track, make sure the acreage didn't change, that kind of stuff. But yes, there will be a bump up if there's increase in buildings. Like this is one, I was working on a Bears Den Rural Historic District, and I knew this guy, Jules Demonet, I love that, had the, this big inn on top of the mountain. It was called the Blue Ridge Inn. It was a hotel, and see here, it confirms that it was on the mountain. And then, look at that, it tells me here that, you know, 177 off for hotel which burned. So it can tell you things like that as well. I've had clients who insist their house is 1811, and I look at it and I'm like, this looks more like 1890. And people, you know, get attached. Yeah, that's another thing, you have to keep an open mind. They get attached to a certain date and they think the older the better, and that's not necessarily true, it's just the history. And I tried, you know, breaking the news to her gingerly, and it was only when I found a land tax record that showed the same thing with her house, it had burnt. And when I showed her that, then there was, you know, end of discussion. But so they can be very helpful, these land tax records. Okay, census records. Now these are available online, and if you are, if you have a library card, which I hope you all do, you can actually, well, you can go to Hanley Library down in archives and use Ancestry.com and the others, or from the luxury of your home, you can use Heritage Quest, where you log in with your library card and you can use this information. And you search for these names that you have gotten from your chain of title. It all comes back to chain of title. Also with census, there are other schedules. There's the slave schedule, which is very helpful. That's organized according to the owner. Agricultural schedule tells you how many acres of land were improved, were unimproved, what the owner raised, like how many beehives he had, how many pounds of, you know, cheese he would produce. There's just an amazing amount of information. Then there's also an industrial census schedule. Let me go back here. Okay, so the way these work is, so they're organized. You have to figure out what district your person lived in, but that's pretty easy. Like in Frederick County, it's pretty much the same magisterial districts that you have now, and they have one for the city of Winchester. And then you're going to look them up. They're they're unfortunately not alphabetical. That's why searching on the internet is so fabulous, because it takes you to that page. Gone are the days when we'd flip through these things looking. But, you know, here this is telling me that Ottaway McCormick, in, I don't know what year this is, probably 1850, no, I don't know, was 43 years old, male. He was a farmer. And it tells me that actually the value of his property. So it tells you lots of different things, and it tells you who was living in his household and what their ages were, if they were female. And this is really interesting. Often you'll find a school teacher, for example, or maids or things like that living there. And that can sometimes, like if you had a school teacher, maybe you have an outbuilding in your backyard and you're thinking, wow, that's it. This is probably my favorite. This is a 1881 from Maine, and it was for Mr. Sutherland, and I don't think he was home, but he lives with his wife, who's 50, and then his mother-in-law, who's 83, and the wife keeps house. And I always like to think the two of them must have told the census taker, oh, you know, he's too lazy to do anything. That's listed as his job. Funny? Anyway, okay. I had to laugh. And they, you know, the census taker misspelled two. It was T-O. But anyway, to me, that's classic. Okay. Mutual assurance policies. These are insurance policies, and you see when they ran from. And there's an index at the State Library. County Library Archives has copies of them. You can, there is a somewhat of a website that you can search by name at Mary Washington College University. That is if you just Google it for mutual assurance, Mary Washington, you'll find it. What that is a database. So you search by name and it'll list them. They have tons of the ones in Winchester, tons of them. Now you can't see the image. It'll just tell you things that the policy says. They look like this. It tells you, like, this is Nathaniel Burrell. And, I think this is 1804, I can't remember. But it's telling you, this says Merchant Mill, $5,000 is what it was insured for. And then there is down here this lovely drawing that tells me there's, and this is the Burrell Morgan Mill, Stone Merchant Mill. It tells you, you know, that it was 1 story high, 60 by 40 feet, and then it lists these other buildings and the distance. You know, there's a wooden storehouse, which is actually still there, that's 90 feet away, and then a cabin. A lot of these buildings are there. So these mutual assurance can sometimes help you greatly. And then, of course, maps are really, really informative for lots of different reasons. This is one of the earliest maps. We have the 1809 Varley map. The houses that are listed here, you know, are really the large houses, although they do show some of the earlier ones, but this shows all the mills. And there's a key that goes with this. These are, you know, they're churches, taverns. Plus, what's really interesting is it shows you the road network, because the roads that were in place, you know, sort of dictate where houses were built. So, again, this is all part of trying to develop that historic context. And there is a blow-up of the Winchester that's an inset to this map, for those of you who are interested. Then, Frederick County and Winchester are very fortunate to have Lakes Atlas. Some counties like Clarke do not have them. And these were made in 1880, and you had to subscribe to these. So not everyone is listed, but you know, they really provide a lot of information. Names of property owners, and then like churches. I love this little inset of Brucetown. Then, of course, the Sanborn maps, which were insurance maps. And again, these are, Winchester is fortunate to have them. A lot of localities do not have them. Rural areas do not have them. These are available in multiple ways. They have some originals at the Hanley Library that are colored. They're available online. If you go to a university that has a subscription to Sanborn maps, I don't know if Shenandoah does, probably not, but if someone has influence at Shenandoah, they should make them get thing. But you can search according to locality and year. So the idea is, and they started in the 1880s, the idea is you look and see, you know, if your building was there and how it has changed over time. Now again, these are just sort of tricky. First thing is, the copies that are available online or whatever are not colored. So what does the color tell you? Well, blue means stone, red means brick, and yellow means frame. So for example, you can get really confused because you think it's your building, but it could have burnt and not. And I remember when I was doing some work on the Solenberger building, there had been an earlier building that was there, and I had very carefully looked at these Sanborn maps, but there were two that were just a little bit different. I thought, what the heck is going on? And it was, you know, I really felt like they were two different buildings, and then it was looking in the newspaper, I found out about that fire that happened New Year's Eve and burned down the original building that had been there, and it had more frame to it than the building that's there now. So the color is really important. Again, being detail-oriented. Any questions about?
The yellow is probably a porch, right?
Yes.
And
And
it
this
looks like
tells you, this
one
is
of
a
the-
one-story porch. This tells you it's two-story porch.
And it looks like one of the porches goes out into the street, the
Yeah.
second one. Is that?
Probably onto the sidewalk, I don't know. Let me see, where is this? I don't know where this is. I want to, I don't know where this is. I should know. But yeah, and I mean, a lot of times, that'll be, someone will have drawn something, and then they will have drawn it out of scale, and it'll be out onto the street, whereas if it had been shorter, it would have been. Do you see what I'm saying? People did make mistakes back then, yes?
What's the latest date for Sanborn?
Oh, they go up, I think they're still making them. I know I used some from the 20th century when I did the expansion of the district for the industrial area.
Can you spell that, Sam?
Sanborn.
Okay.
They're fire insurance maps. And then, the another little thing with that's now happened is if you go onto the USGS site, that's the mapping, like USGS maps, they've now digitized all their historic maps. So you can go to Winchester and you can see the list of all the digitized map and you can download it. For example, I'm doing some work in the Plains, and this is from 1938, and it's really handy for me because I know what buildings were there, what the layout was at that time. So my argument for how much of the town is still intact is made stronger by comparing it to this earlier map. And then, of course, aerials. And I don't know if Winchester, a lot of localities like Charlottesville, they've put all their historic aerials online as part of their city website. Anyone who has influence with the city, try to get that done. These are 1936 U.S. Department of Agriculture maps of Clarke County that are really helpful because, I don't know if you saw in the paper a couple of years ago, we had a gentleman who scanned them all at a very high level of resolution. So you can actually zoom in and see all kinds of things. This is Berryville right here. This is old Route 7, so new Route 7 sort of goes like this. And here's Claremont, and it shows you the pattern, of the land. Like we know there were orchards back here based on this. It tells you a lot about it. Those are really handy. And then, of course, lots of other sources, city directories and old phone books. I love old phone books. If anyone has an old phone book, you want to get rid of it, I mean, it has to really be old. Like 60s. I love those. Newspapers, oh gosh, I every time I'm doing research on something and I'm reading in the newspaper, I'll inevitably find something that's not related to that project, but it's either something I've worked on in the past or something it's like, wow, I should save this because I think I'll need it in the future. And then private insurance policies. Work I've done for Glen Burnie, they didn't have any insurance policies. I was like, okay, who are the big insurance companies in town? I contacted all of them. We found insurance policies from before the 1953 work that was done. 1959 work. It was a 1955 insurance policy with photographs and all kinds of things. So you just think about where are different places. And then, of course, postcards. eBay has made that really easy. I don't spend near enough time doing that because it's just such a time eater, but I know there are lots of people who collect postcards in Winchester. I only know their alias names. But anyway, then of course building permits, they can tell you a lot, and they are at the planning office, so you can go look up your building. There's a little index card, and they'll tell you what the numbers are, and they'll pull the forms for you. And then of course your lovely website, where work I was doing on Winchester Towers, found these fabulous photographs of it under construction. Again, phone books. This, tells me, this is Kenilworth out in Frederick County, and look, it was, a home for the aged and convalescent. So you'll find things like that from time to time. And this tells you, like, what business was there at a certain time. I know when I was initially working on this building for the previous owner, trying to come up with a timeline of what it was during different time periods. The phone books were really helpful. Postcards. This is the Clarke County Courthouse, and this postcard I know is before 1938 when they added this addition, and you can see that. And so you can see, you know, progression of things. This is Hawthorne. I don't know, this was in a book. I'm trying to think what book it was in, but you can see this was the Victorian porch that was put on, and then there's the original porch that was there. So it can tell you a lot about buildings. Oh, this I happened to find by accident down in Hanley Library Archives. When I think you're familiar with this building. And it's a postcard, and I knew there had been a windstorm here in March of, what was it, 1930, I can't read upside down, no, 1914, because when I'd done work on the Solenberger building, there were pictures in the newspaper that showed the whole rear end had blown down, which was good because it could justify, you know, replacing it. In this case, that same windstorm that came through took out the gable end of this building that was a tax credit project, and you know, it was always sort of curious as to why that was different color brick, and you know, again, it just tells you more about the building. Again, old postcards. This is in the Plains. These were all these fabulous buildings that were constructed for the Orange County Hunt using money by the Harrimans in the 1920s, and then in 1976, well, there's a train track that goes here. In 1976, a freight train hit a gasoline truck and they all went up in smoke. So these kinds of things, you know, can provide stuff. When I was working on the George Washington Hotel, you know, there was a plethora of information out there. And again, these buildings provide, or these old images provide you clues. This is before the addition was put on to extend the building. You know, people wondered why there's a staircase in this one section, which is, I think, the Martha Washington room now, and it's because that was an entrance off of Cameron Street. And you can see that when they enclosed the entrance and put the Howard Johnsons downstairs. And you know, for this case, it was you know, if they wanted to recreate that entrance, you know, we had proof then that it was originally there. And then of course brochures. These are just great. Then I know when I was working on Hawthorne, again, the context of this, you know, being on such a major transportation route and the Civil War, it was very interesting, and I found some images, you know, from James E. Taylor's sketchbook, and also from different newspapers that showed, you know, that again confirmed what was there. Okay, so that is really, I think I touched on the high points of places I normally look, and will find information. And then, of course, like I said, you know, and maybe you can have other things that would teach you architectural history. But, you know, you need to know, especially the building techniques and technology. And there are lots of books out there. And my Frederick County book actually does a really good job explaining that. So if you don't have it, you should get it. I still use it as a reference for those kinds of things. And also it's good to know the local, you know, vernacular. And so the other thing is to really be well-read, like just, you know, I don't know if PHW has a library. Do you have a library?
Oh,
Just
yes.
go there and look at their library and see what they have and be familiar with those books, because those, you know, Quarles' books provide great information, and that's a good starting place. Again, you know, and even with my work, don't take my word for it. You still need to justify it, because you have to understand a lot of these were not done, you know, to the nth degree. I mean, I know Quarles did title work on most buildings, but there are mistakes in those. That was, you know, before the time of computers, and things got changed, and so you have to really be careful. And I know with me, I did not go back and do the history of every building. But, you know, and you just need to use common sense. Like, you know, this building, you know, I can look at it and say, oh gosh, it's kind of a strange building, and it was not done, it was not constructed all at the same time, because it's got, you know, there are visual clues. It's very much, you know, down here, a Greek Revival building, you know, in the sense that it's just very formal, symmetrical. And if we got closer, these are wooden lintels with little corner blocks. And then this thing, I'm like, wait a minute, this is I love this house. It's been unfortunately changed. The current owners didn't like that. But, you know, so that gives you a clue that something's changed. Again, construction material, you know, when was stone still used in foundation? If your house has a formed concrete block foundation, formed concrete foundation versus concrete block versus stone, you know, that'll tell you things about when it was constructed. Also finishes, like this is an example of pebble dash, and, you know, that was the vinyl siding of the early 20th century. But don't be, you know, confused and think, oh, well, then that means my house was built then. This is actually a log house, and you can see the clue. There's not much reveal between the window and the stucco, so you know that that stucco was added on top of something else. And sure enough, there's, you know, wood siding underneath that. Looking at the roofing and seeing, you know, what was there, and particularly the cornice. Linda, this, you might recognize this place. Also looking and making, you know, assumptions about what came first, the little portion back there or the new portion. And that's the other thing. Houses evolve over time. Additions are made. I mean, think of, you know, any of you have a house, you probably, after you bought it, you did something to it. And that's nothing new. People have been doing that for ages. And then looking at things like the location of the chimneys, or these, you know, exterior end chimneys are earlier than interior end chimneys. This one actually is a redo, because you can look at that mortar and it's just sort of too perfect. And then moving towards the favorite pigeon roosts, you know, the interior end chimneys. How large is the chimney? What material is it of? Is it out of that rusticated concrete block? That would probably be 1910. And then, you know, again, looking at resources. This is the knitting mill with, you know, the windows that were there, and then this was we'd done research to figure out when those windows were put in, so this could be justified. And sort of, and that we found old photographs, but then we found building permits that showed that too. And then remember that buildings have, they'll often combine different periods. Like this is a house on Loudon Street. It's a, you know, really a fine example of a Federal-style Georgian house, but that this is all colonial revival that was added later. And as you can't see the door here, but that was a later addition as well. So you'll have, you know, when a house is remodeled, it's not completely remodeled. Parts and pieces are. Then learn a little bit about, you know, if you want to get more into the nitty-gritty, learn about the chronology of, like, building materials, when, you know, circular saws were used, when something is pit sawn versus sash sawn, what that means. Also, the nail chronology is really helpful. Although I just worked on a project where they used fake nails, you know, to make it appear earlier. But these are all very helpful and can help you date a building. This, I guess, is to, you know, when you look at a building and you realize that this is Red Lion Tavern, that it has changed, you know, over time. These windows would never have been this big and would never have been 1/1 sash. And again, just trying to imagine what these buildings would have looked like. And they can be really deceiving. Stephen City is particularly deceiving because while things look, you know, Victorian, here you've got 2/2 windows, weatherboard siding, this, you know, wonderful sawn work in the porch. But if you stepped onto the porch, you know, you would look and you'd see that the windows are really deep, and in fact it's a much earlier log building. And, you know, just sort of use common sense. This is this really ornate door handle, you know, and you look at it, you think, oh my gosh, this is like early German ironwork. But then, you know, step back and realize, oh, it's on a modern French door. This is a Glen Burnie, not an original feature. John Lewis gave me this slide. It always made me laugh because his point was sometimes things are really obvious. Obviously, did not come from Elias Jenkins' Ordinary. It's a Coke bottle, plastic Coke bottle. So again, it's a matter of don't be so focused that you don't lift your head and sort of look around and see, does this really make sense? So it really boils down to, the research you need to do right there. And you really need luck. And sometimes, you, like I said, hit the mother lode of information, and other times you'll spend hours and hours and hours and find nothing. But sometimes that can tell you something as well. So I wish you all good luck, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Yes?
In our house, we think a Civil War soldier died in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
We think our house was used as a Civil War hospital.
Mhm.
How can we find out?
Well, do you know who the Civil War soldier was?
No.
This is just hearsay that you've had,
What-
you've been told? Did you find blood in the backyard?
Well, we found
Bloodroot?
in the steps, but
Well,
why do I know it's blood? It was just kind of a...
right, it might have happened last week.
Might have been a cat.
Well, you can look, there are, well, first of all, where is it located? What battle would have occurred there? Because, people just didn't show up during the Civil War and die in your backyard, generally speaking. So, is it part of a battle? There's so much Civil War history, so much information available, descriptions of what happened during battles, when I did a battlefield historic district across the mountain, the Unison Battlefield Historic District, and it was, such a embarrassing loss for the Union troops that there were these, there weren't court cases, but they took the statements of everyone in extreme detail as to what happened, specifying the buildings. So you have to look for information like that. There's a lot of Civil War, related information available. Other than, also maybe finding out who owned the house during that time, what did they do, maybe they were an undertaker. Look in the census records, see what was going on. Those are, it's going to be hit or miss. And it probably, depending on the building, most buildings I go to in this area, everyone says, yeah, if it's a big house, it was used as a Civil War hospital. Just like in their basement, like where the food was kept, that's where they kept the bad slaves. I get told that all the time. And I also get told my brick was brought over as ballast and my stone was brought over as ballast. So there are certain things that, in particular areas, just run rampant. So that even makes it worse because you have to sort of prove that something occurred, and sometimes that is very difficult. So, but secondary resources are going to be, I think, your biggest help to answer your question. Civil War diaries, like Cornelia Peake MacDonald's diary, she talks about all these buildings in Winchester, what they were used for, and then a diary that Eloise just did, again, that has so much information. I am slowly reading that book, and it's got all these sticky notes in it because she mentions people, that have relations to Clarke County projects I'm working on. It's like, oh, really? They did come and stay here during the Civil War. Or she'll mention someone who's imprisoned in Berryville or whatever. So you have to just read a lot and look at these things. Yes, sir.
And there's you mentioned all the building material and things. Well, there are things like the old knob and tube wiring.
Mm-hmm.
The rafters went from random sizes to standard sizes, and then they shrunk to what's current now, that 1.5 inch wide. Is there a book that can kind of show you what period they happened?
I don't know of one. And I've actually thought about, because people have asked me that question about having some sort of workshops that sort of show that kind of information. There are, actually, maybe there's some books on like timber framing would have that kind of information. But I think we have done a poor job in this country of like talking about, showing those things. Like in England, those things are very readily available. But some institutions have done them like that. There's a good nail chronology, I think that was done by the University of Pennsylvania, that is like a folio like this that breaks down the different, periods for the nails. But around, here, I mean, circular saws, it depends. It depends if there was a sawmill nearby. It could be pre-Civil War, but usually it's after Civil War. It depends how the rafters, are they pegged? Are they lapped? Are they nailed? Is there a ridge board? There are a lot of variables. You can't just say, oh, if you see this, if you see Roman numerals on your rafters, then your house was built before 1810. Because, you have to look, again, it's a matter of looking at everything and seeing how the puzzle fits together. Sorry. Yes, ma'am.
You've mentioned goals in the beginning, now what your purpose. And my purpose would be to get my house on one of the registers,
Okay.
Virginia International. I enjoy doing research, but is it possible for an individual to get it through, or reasonable for an individual to
Yeah, I
get
mean,
it through? Or
I equate it to like hiring an accountant to do your taxes or doing it yourself. So
you can do it. It's
Sure.
just that you don't know. Well, I
Sure, and there's lots of, well, first of all, where is your house? Is it in Winchester?
in Frederick County.
It's out in the county.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good, because if you're within the Winchester Historic District, you're gonna have a harder time getting individually listed, because that's just their
I've
For
done some
policy.
preliminary work, but then.
Okay, so you did a PIF, a preliminary information form?
Probably.
Yeah, and it determined that it was eligible. What's your property?
It was eligible. On an Apple Pie Ridge, one of the Lupton houses.
Oh, okay,
And so I've gotten through the eligibility
yeah.
part of it quite a while ago. And so now I'm thinking, I have time to do.
Yeah, well, I think you should at least try to do it. There are a lot of samples you can use. If you go online to the Department of Historic Resources website and go click on Historic Registers,
Okay.
and then you click down, there's county and city listing, it's alphabetical. So you could open up Frederick County, Winchester, Clarke County, and see samples.
Okay.
So that would give you an idea of what you need. And then, of course, Department of Historic Resources is there. I know Joni and David came and spoke, and I mean, they are civil servants after all, and they're here to serve the public.
Yeah.
So you can use them, and I would encourage you to use them. And they have helped, people write nominations in the past.
Okay. And where are they? Who are they?
They're in Stephen City, and it's Department of Historic Resources, and Joni Evans, her number is 868-7029, and David Edwards is 868-7030. But they are very easy to work with, very helpful, and could, I think help you along the way. But I would certainly try myself,
Mhm.
especially if you have time.
Yeah, that sounds like.
That's what it boils down to. Time is money, Yes,
Okay,
Linda.
thank you. Two questions. Have you ever run across the house that you did that research for me on the name Charles Brown and all, and any other reference?
I haven't, but remember, we had that mutual assurance map
Right.
for him, which was a huge coup. But no, I can't
I
remember that I have, but I mean, I haven't specifically.
You didn't know he served in the House of Delegates.
Mhm.
And then the second part, just give us a little overview about anything new in the Preservation of Virginia Conference.
Oh, it was a very good conference. It was down in Roanoke, and I don't know how many of you are members of Preservation Virginia and the local branch of Preservation Virginia, which actually was cut off from Preservation Virginia, but is still the Northern Shenandoah Valley. Actually, Chester is on that board. And anyway, the conference went very well. There was all sorts of discussion, anywhere from that we should rate buildings in historic districts according to their level of significance, to the psychology behind why some people care about historic preservation and others don't. I found that fascinating. And I could sit here and look at this crowd and pigeonhole everyone based on what he said, but it was really interesting, you know, and how as preservationists, we should, you know, when we walk into a room with certain kind of people there, how we can work around that. There were lots of, you know, great things that were happening in Roanoke. Then there was something very interesting as an architectural historian that was really, there's so much push, you know, to do all these historic surveys and get all these districts listed, and a lot of this is driven by the tax credits, because to be eligible for the tax credits, you know, you have to be individually listed or contributing building in a historic district. So a lot of the push for these historic districts is coming from that. That's what's driving them. And they're saying, you know, are we not spending the time that we used to spend really looking at the buildings and documenting, you know, doing the detailed kind of research? And then a lot of these buildings are, you know, that are being demolished, should we be spending a lot of time trying to document them? And I mean, I don't know if PHW has a thing where, you know, buildings that are threatened, like the buildings that are going to come down on Berryville Avenue, you know, if there's an effort to go and document them before they're lost. But it was a really thought-provoking session that I think, you know, we maybe fight the good fight, but then we don't follow up, and, you know, we lose that little window of opportunity for buildings that are demolished. Yes, ma'am?
Do they also look at it from a tourism standpoint? I mean, when you got these communities that are taking down these specific properties, and you at the same time that community is also supporting a tourism office who's trying to draw people in.
Doesn't make sense.
Do they not see that piece of the puzzle?
Do you mean they, meaning
The elected officials?
city council and
whoever's in
whatever?
charge? Yes.
I can't speak for them. I don't understand some of that. I think a lot of times, you know, you're putting a Band-Aid, you know, on a sore for someone who has leprosy, you know, instead of like really looking at what is causing the problem. Let us try to deal with that. Maybe the $1 million would be better spent coming up with some sort of fund to offer loans to you know, but I mean, I don't know, and I don't know, you know, I haven't been that involved with that at all.
Does the conference, like what you just went to, do they look at it and
They
try
do.
to
I mean, heritage
align?
tourism, there have been ones that have been, this one was about a sense of place, and there were people, you know, the planner from Winchester was there, and there were discussions about how important a sense of place is. And, you know, we focused on Roanoke, which has had a lot of urban renewal, but in the past, you know, and the last conference I went to there was that they had, Preservation of Virginia was maybe 10 years ago, and, you know, by then it was still, I mean, it was already starting to come back, but really now it's just amazing, the renaissance that's there. And it was about, you know, these buildings, like doing lots of tax credits, and it was really, really exciting to see. And they have a really dynamic, at dinner I sat next to their economic development person, and she, you know, she's really dynamic, and was saying how things have changed. You know, since they opened, Virginia Tech has opened a medical school in Roanoke along with a hospital there. So that has brought in, you know, a different kind of citizen. People come, she said there are Europeans that have come and work there, and so, you know, things change, and it's, yes, it influences the economic development. Yes.
Is there any move to put the deed books online? Is that done in some?
Clarke County is done, and which is really handy, especially if you have a bad back like that.
Winchester, no.
No.
You might have you know, you have to get you have to buy a subscription. So I bet you Winchester has it, because, you know, it used to be, boy, I remember when I was doing work in Loudoun County back in the 90s, I'd go in there, and I felt like I was in a fraternity house, because there were all these young guys there eating and researching, looking through, you know, all these microfilm books and whatever, and it was, you know, when the real estate boom was really happening, and you have to do a chain of title, you know, in order to do this proper. I mean, just remember, do these guys sleep here too? There were so many of them. Well, now you go into, courthouses, and it's like a ghost town in those clerks' offices, compared to what it used to be. And I think a lot of that is because it's, done online, but usually they're like $500 or whatever you pay a subscription to. So, and there's something, fun about going and getting dirty and breaking your back and looking for that book you need, and it's piled underneath, it's the bottom one underneath all these books. And then, the other thing is, and this is true, I think, of anything online, you hone in and you go look at it, but a lot of times it's like what you find along the way getting to that, maybe you'd find the Charles Brent reference if, you had looked, but that's the downside, I think, of digitized information, because it takes you right to it. A lot of times, oh, shall I flip the page? And, you don't look at that, so. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for coming.